Hey guys, Kevin Cleary here with a knife video, and today we're going to talk about all the dumb stuff that we buy into. Today we're talking about knife myths that are widely believed among the community, things that I hear in comments or see posted on various social media outlets. And look, let's first take a little break and make ourselves feel a little better by pointing out that believing myths is pretty common to every hobby, right? I don't care if it's about fishing or hunting, if it's bro science at the gym, if it's some wives' tale about, if you have a cold, you should stand on your head and spin around 3 times and then drink, 3 shots of lemon juice and you'll be fine. Whatever the case may be, there are all kinds of myths out there that are, and essentially the way we're going to do it is a myth is something that is widely believed but doesn't really have any empirical evidence backing it up, or sometimes, and in fact often does, contradict the actual science that's out there. All right, so we're talking about knife myths. Now let me give you a couple things by way of introduction. First, I've included 2 myths in here that are true, okay? So I'm going to see if I can throw you a curveball, and I'll try to be as convincing as I can to get you to believe me. Comment down below when you come across the one that you think, or the 2 that you think are me having a little fun with you. The other thing is go over to White Mountain Knives. I'll include links to White Mountain Knives and my Amazon store. If you like what we're doing here, go over and make your purchases through that. Even go ahead and comment. If there's something that you're going to buy, go and ask me to put it specifically in my Amazon store, and I'll do that. That does help the channel a whole lot. And in case there's a myth out there that YouTubers are like independently wealthy and are making tons of money off YouTube videos, let's dispel that myth right now. Most YouTubers that I know, and certainly myself included, do it because they really like knives and other gear stuff, and they just want to talk about it, and so they put out a lot of their own money out of their own pockets to do that. And I don't think any of them mind doing it. If they did, they wouldn't bother. And so I make these videos for fun, but it does help that does help when you use those links or offer any other support. So let's go ahead and get into the myths themselves. And the first one is going to be, actually, let me get some of these knives out of the way, that weight is the primary consideration for whether or not you're going to want to carry a knife. So I've got here the PMP Revenge, great knife, such a cool design. And let's grab the Recon One. Now, the Recon One weighs less, okay, but I dare say that many of you watching would really not just consider weight when you're deciding which one of these to carry. Okay, this is like 6 point something ounces, this is 5 point something ounces, but this goes in and out of pocket pretty easily. It's quite slim, it's a really cool design, it's certainly higher end materials. There are a lot of considerations that go into whether or not you're going to carry a knife beyond just weight. And I think Nut and Fancy sort of had that 4-ounce magic number that, any knife to be a good EDC has to be 4 ounces or under. And I really just don't buy that. And I frankly don't think that most people make that their primary consideration. All right, let's move on to another one that is definitely a reviewer touted idea, and that is about full flat grinds. Now look, full flat grinds are great. Let's see, do I have any others here that I can show you? This is kind of... So full flat grinds are great. They're really versatile. They tend to cut pretty well. They tend to do a lot of things reasonably well, and that's why they're good, okay? But let's use this guy as an example, because it's a true full flat grind. Is this going to slice better if you went ahead and did a secondary pass and put a hollow grind right here in the bottom, say, 1/2 inch of this blade? Absolutely, that's going to make it slice better. Okay, and so it's really not the slicing ability that makes a full flat grind good. It's the versatility. It's a good balance between toughness and durability and slicing power, and it gives you some options in terms of how you can make your knife a little more durable while still getting good cutting performance out of it. Now, I prefer to achieve that with a hollow grind, but a full flat grind is not all that it's necessarily cracked up to be. Let's touch on another one here, and that is bearings. So often you'll hear guys like me talk about the fact that, well, bearings provide a really nice action, and they do. They have a limitation of being of getting kind of gummed up and requiring extra maintenance. And there's some truth to this, but I don't think it's quite as significant as we as YouTubers sometimes make it out to be. And really, we in the knife community sometimes make it out to be, right? A knife like this, yes, it has bearings in it. Yes, it has a great action, but it's definitely designed to be a hard use knife. And so do the bearings disqualify it? And I have to say no. All right, and there are a couple of reasons why not. First of all, when I'm cutting stuff, I don't usually jam the knife up to here into whatever I'm cutting out here. So whatever I'm dealing with in terms of, a piece of wood or something else, the material's not getting into the pivot itself all the time anyway. Secondly, if dirt and grime, let's say I'm in a really dusty environment, I drop my knife in the mud or the dirt, I can still clean bearings relatively easily without even taking the whole knife apart. Now, sometimes I will actually loosen the pivot off, but I don't even always do that. A lot of times, just good cleaning with WD-40 or some other kind of good cleaner, maybe a gun cleaning compound, whatever, and then spraying it out with forced air and then reapplying lubricant is going to work for the vast majority of knives in the vast majority of situations. So it's really not, while I often prefer washers, a knife like this that has phosphor bronze washers, really what's happening here, and the reason this can have a decent action is because the tolerances are pretty good. Now, so if I was going to have a critique of bearings, this would be it. You can get away with more in terms of not having your tolerances quite right in a knife with bearings than you can on washers, okay? And so it makes sense if you're doing a really budget-friendly knife to go with bearings because you can get really nice action even if things are maybe not totally flush and square, and if things are out of spec just a little bit, you're likely to get a little better performance out of that. Let's move on now to some stainless steel frame locks here, and you're going to notice something that I've often pointed out, okay? And by the way, all of these things I'm not saying are terrible, but notice here there's a little piece of steel. On this guy, we have a little piece of steel. Hold on, focus. On this guy, we've got, guess what? A little piece of steel. We call that a stainless steel lock bar insert. And it's not a bad thing, but the idea that just having a stainless steel lock bar insert automatically makes a knife better is not entirely true. In fact, there are tons of great Hinderers out there that don't have them. Now, I know Hinderer recently switched, but there are some other considerations here, okay? It can improve the longevity of the lock face. All right. And perhaps, and someone who's manufacturing would have to speak to this, I suspect companies are more likely to do it because there's extra cost and extra work involved in properly hardening that titanium face. Okay. That seems to be the thing. But just keep in mind that just because it has a stainless steel lock bar insert, that can actually make things worse. And sometimes there are knives with stainless steel lock bar inserts that have less friction now between these two surfaces and therefore have worse lockup after you do a lock bar insert rather than before. All right. Next knife myth that is often perpetuated is that you must, should, can, never, ever, ever pry even the slightest bit with your knife. Now, part of a flat ground blade is because they want a bit of extra rigidity that way. And so, putting this under something and giving it a little wiggle is probably not going to hurt it as much as most of us think. Now, I'm not recommending all of us go out and try it, but the fact is, especially with a super hard steel like ZDP 189 or 20 CV with, 65 Rockwell hardness or something, a little bit of prying probably isn't going to hurt it. All right, moving on. Number 6, jimping needs to be everywhere on every knife. And I've often heard guys talk about, here's a perfect example. This knife, let's see, I've got another one somewhere, not this one. Oh, I know. The Kizer T2. By the way, this is the PMP Revenge. This is the Kizer T2. I'll try to name the knives. I know I forget that sometimes, and then you guys are down in the comments going, Kevin, I really like that knife. What the heck is it called? So, Kizer T2, PMP Revenge. Neither of these have jimping at all, and yet I would argue that both of them are extremely grippy and have actually really good retention, and I wouldn't be concerned about using these in the least. Okay? even though they have no jimping. Now, if there is going to be jimping, I think it needs to be well done, and I think it needs to be well thought out, and it needs to be sharp enough to grip, okay? Sometimes, here's an example of, there's some jimping here and it catches a little bit, but not a whole lot. And generally speaking, I like slightly sharper jimping if the knife is designed for that kind of task. All right, let's see. Next myth that I want to touch on is the modification myth. And that is, I'm going to send this knife off to a knife pimper and I'm going to pay him, $150 to do X, Y, and Z to this knife. And that's okay, because when I go to sell it, I'm going to be able to get my, X, Y, my $200 or $150 back out of the knife. And the fact is that whatever money you spend pimping out a knife is gone, okay? You are not getting it back because the changes you make are personal to you. So what you've actually done is reduced the number of people that might be interested in buying that if you ever do try to sell it. And number two, you've made changes from factory. So anyone who's spent any time selling stuff knows that the ones that sell the quickest are the ones that say new in box, fresh from the factory, still has factory edge, right? People want the knives that are like brand new, and yours is now the furthest thing from like brand new, okay? And that is not likely to help your efforts at a sale. Okay, so that's the modification myth. Next, you don't really need a good sharpening system. You don't really need a good sharpening system. One of the things I get asked about quite often, both by people on the channel, through YouTube and Facebook, and by my friends and neighbors is, they know I have knives, they know I like knives. What do I use to sharpen? What do I recommend for them to use to sharpen? And I pretty much always start off with the Spyderco SharpMaker and kind of go up from there. I really do think the KME is one of the better systems out there. Now, I already have an Edge Pro Apex, so I don't really anticipate buying a KME, but if I was buying one new, the KME I think comes in at a decent amount less than the Edge Pro Apex. And so I'd probably go with the KME just for price alone, because I think the performance is every bit as good. All that said, if you even have a couple of decent knives, it is worth your time, it is worth your money to go out and buy a decent sharpener. It absolutely is. Next myth that often gets perpetuated, especially by us goofy YouTubers, is that action is highly important in your folder. Okay, and that's kind of sad and frustrating because it really means we've kind of lost sight of what's going on here. A knife is a cutting tool. Okay, the most important thing it does is cut. And so a knife that cuts well is good. All right. Now, yeah, there can be some other things going on, some things to do with ergonomics or opening and closing the knife. I get that. But it shouldn't be made a primary consideration. Now, look, I'm a bit of a knife nerd. I'm a bit of a knife snob. I like that smooth action that you get from, dual row bearings. And I'm not going to apologize for that. But I also need to remind myself sometimes, especially when I'm getting ready to do a review, that a knife is a cutting tool first. All right. And afterward comes whatever else is going on. And so that is a myth that I know us YouTubers are especially guilty of perpetuating. Next one, and this is one that kind of everyone can share in, is that price is based on materials and production cost. All right, that is the way that they arrive at the price of a knife is, well, this knife cost me XY dollars to make, so I'm going to charge XYZ dollars to buy it. Well, the fact is, the price of a knife is based on what the market will bear. Okay, it has nothing to do with materials. Now, yes, sometimes if you increase the quality of your materials, maybe your blade steel or your handle material or whatever, you can charge a little bit more. But let's give an example. Let's imagine I was a new knife maker and I decided to make this knife right here, the Real Steel Griffin, which is a really cool knife. Okay, and for some reason, just because I'm not terribly efficient and I may be slow and I haven't chosen the best factory to produce stuff, and I may be buying parts at a price that's a little too high, every one of these is costing me $100 to produce. And so I say to myself, well, self, if you're going to make money on this, you're going to have to charge $200. Guess what? No one is paying $200 for that aluminum knife with 14C28N steel. It just ain't happening. And so I'm trying to switch things out a little bit here. And so what a good company is going to charge is as much as they possibly can and still have people buying their stuff. Okay, that's what price is based on. Now, does that, do our preferences come into it? Are we willing to pay more for 20 CV than we are for D2? Sure we are. Those are knife steels for those not familiar. Sure we are. But as end users and as producers, we need to keep in mind that that price point is about what the market will bear. It's not really about what I'm offering in terms of materials, okay? Let's see here, price. Oh yes, you need specialty oil for your knives. Okay, so in this community, one of the things that gets tossed around a lot is what is the best pivot lubrication, and there are tons of good ones out there. And honestly, unless you are really into it. Now, if you're just a huge knife nerd like I am, and you just love knives and you want to get the best action out of all your folders, go out and buy all the great pivot lubes out there. Buy KPL and Frog Lube and Nano Oil and everything else, and try them all out and see what works the best. That's great. But if my neighbor comes over and says, "Hey, Kevin, I know you're into knives, and I've got a folding knife and it's kind of gummed up. What should I use to lubricate it?" I'm going to say, like, go get your wife's sewing machine oil or get your gun oil out, clean it up with WD-40, and then clean it off and use that oil. Okay, and it's going to be just fine for most applications. Now, I will say for my mileage, I do use KPL, and I really, really like it, and it's not overly expensive. So sure, if you're into the hobby, definitely. And even if you're not into the hobby, it's only like $10, so it's not that big of a deal. But I wouldn't try to argue that you must use some kind of specialty lubricant in order to have good action on your knives. Next one is that the compression lock is stronger than a liner lock. I don't even think I have any liner locks here. How is that? Oh yeah, here we go. I do have a liner lock. What I don't have is a compression lock. Sorry about that. So yeah, especially Spyderco fanboys who don't think about anything else and believe that every knife to be good has to have a big hole in the blade. Will say that, yeah, the compression lock is far superior to a liner lock. It's much stronger. And yeah, that's kind of a myth. All right, if you know that the compression lock is basically just a reverse liner lock, then you know that they can't really be stronger. All right. Oh, I know, here's another one. So this kind of goes along with what I said about sharpening systems, that you don't need one. And this one is sharpening is extremely difficult, and I probably can't do it. And probably this is one that sometimes we as reviewers contribute to as well. If I'm talking about a knife like this with 14C28N steel, I'm going to be like, oh, you know what? This knife holds an edge pretty well, and it's not that bad to sharpen. But then when we switch over to the M390, I'm going to be like, yeah, this is pretty hard steel, and it can be difficult to get a good edge. Well, somebody watching that can be like, oh man, I've got M390. Maybe I shouldn't try. I don't know if I can do it. Trust me, you can do it with a little bit of practice, especially, start off, don't use any kind of automatic system, but, any kind of system that uses stones and is fixed angle is great. It's going to take you a little bit of practice, but it's well worth your time to put in the effort and get good at putting an edge on your knives. They're all going to get dull eventually anyway, so you may as well just bite the bullet and learn it. Okay. Let's talk next about one that I hear often. Okay, and this is the knife you have myth. All right, the knife you have. So, the assumption here is that I need to always be carrying a knife with me that is going to be suitable for a defensive or survival situation. All right, and that just doesn't make sense, okay? And I'll tell you why. I guess it doesn't make sense for everyone, right? So maybe you're, I don't know, a search and rescue technician, you're a first responder of some kind, you're a Navy SEAL, you're going into hostile territory on a regular basis, right? And then, sure, make sure that your EDC knife is a capable knife that can help you in a survival situation or in a defensive situation. But what are the chances that, you or I driving to work are going to get sucked up into a tornado and dropped in the middle of the wilderness, right? It just isn't going to happen. And if you are going to be in a situation where that could happen, well then yeah, by all means, carry a knife that's capable and can deal with that kind of a scenario. But okay, if you're just the average guy driving back and forth to work, you don't need a knife that can help you survive in the forest, right? Unless you're going on a hike or you're helicoptering into a remote wilderness, well then of course you got to carry the right knife for the job. But to think that every day you must be prepared to find yourself in a survival situation and have to catch animals and get water and make fire and all of this, unless you have the kind of job that requires that, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay, so that's a myth that I hear tossed around an awful lot. I'll review a knife, let's say I review this knife, and then someone will comment, well, will that knife, can that knife skin an animal and help you survive in the forest? And I'm like, no, right? Why is that the measuring stick for every single knife? Of course, it makes sense to use that as the measuring stick for a survival knife, but if you're not, claiming to offer a survival knife, then no, it's not a big deal. Let's see, what else have we got to talk about here? Oh, yes. Now, this one might generate a little bit of controversy, but I'm going to say it anyway. And that is the myth that made in the USA means better quality. Okay, now, if you buy made in the USA because you want to support American workers, I totally get that. And that's a different discussion altogether. However, gone are the days where made in the US meant better quality. All right. Oftentimes, in fact, it means worse quality because labor costs are so high in the US that in order to reach any kind of reasonable price point, really cheap materials and really low levels of quality have to be aimed at, because all my money is being spent on labor and I don't have any left to spend on materials and testing and that kind of thing. Okay. Not totally, it's not true across the board. The other thing is, I'm not disparaging here any factory worker. I'm not. But I will say this. I've got some friends, I've been around some factories before. I've worked in sales. I have friends who manage factories. And a lot of these guys that are working in factories have no marketable skills. They have questionable levels of IQ and questionable behaviors, right? In the washrooms there, it's not uncommon to find needles. It's not uncommon to find people drinking on the job and that kind of stuff. And those kind of people don't lend themselves to high quality manufacturing. All right. Now, yes, there are some very well made US products. Okay. There's no question about that whatsoever. And I believe that it's a problem to transport all of our manufacturing in North America overseas. I don't think that's a healthy option. I don't think it's a wise political choice. And that's one of the things I can at least philosophically agree with Donald Trump on. Maybe I don't agree with all of the tactics he's used to achieve it. But when he says, hey, we need to have stuff made by our own people, I don't have a big problem with that. Okay. But I wouldn't try to sustain the argument that, so I've got all Chinese stuff here. The quality is fantastic. It's extremely high. And if you were to make any of these in the US, you would have to charge 2 or 3 times more. So, that's just the reality of the world in which we live. Okay, number next. Oh yes, this is a good one. Rockwell hardness directly correlates to edge retention, and higher is always better. Okay, here's the fact about this. Now, there is a connection for sure between Rockwell hardness and edge retention and blade performance, but the connection is much more nuanced than is often indicated especially by guys like me, okay? The fact is, each steel is going to have a Rockwell hardness within a range within which it functions best, but also there are other things to consider. How chippy is that steel going to be? What kind of molecular structure is involved in this particular type of steel? Okay, and how bendable and versatile do I want it to be, right? Do I want my steel to break when it's put under pressure, or would I rather have it bend, or would I rather have it a little bit springy? All of those are considerations, and all of those tie into edge retention, okay? A blade that chips has horrible edge retention, even though it actually didn't go dull, it just broke, Okay, let's see here. Oh yeah, another one related to modifying a knife. One small tweak will make this perfect and then I will love it. Now I've got a knife, I don't have it with me here, but you guys have seen me talk about the Zero Tolerance 0640, which is a really cool knife, really comfortable in hand, flips well. There's a lot to like about that knife. I'm not in love with the scales, so I'm thinking about changing them out, okay? Generally speaking, that's not a great idea. One, there are enough knives out there that if you don't love that one as it is, then just buy one you already love. Okay, number two, there's a good chance that you're going to make that modification and it's still not going to do anything for you. You're still not going to love it. All right, the one exception I would make is I really do think if you buy a Cold Steel Ultimate Hunter, and you know you've watched the Apostles video about putting a finger choil on it, I do think that's a worthwhile modification, and I've done that, and I know others have as well, and it's worked really, really well. Blade steel needs to be highly corrosion resistant to be good. This can be a bit of a noob mistake before you're too really good with, you know, knife care and maintenance. It was certainly something that I worried about. I remember I really wanted a Benchmade Contigo when they first came out, and I didn't get one because they were M4 steel and it wasn't stainless. Right? So some of you are laughing because you know better that M4 steel is a great steel. It just requires a little maintenance. I know that now, but I didn't at the time. And so it's, you know, as you live, you learn, right? And so now I would not hesitate to buy a blade in M4 steel. Not that I regret owning the M390 Contigo. What a great knife. I still love it. And I would recommend it to anyone. But it's way more complex than just to say, yeah, a knife that's not stainless should be avoided. Finally, of course, the most important myth is that YouTubers are the ultimate authority in the knife community and should always be listened to on all matters pertaining to which knives you should buy. Now look, if you believe that, then I've got something really important to tell you. What I need you to do is go out and buy about 10 preloaded credit cards, put about $500 on each one, and go ahead and send them over to me, right? If though you believe you should think for yourself and you should examine whatever I say in light of what you know to be true and your own preferences, then hey, that's smart. If you still want to send me those preloaded credit cards, though, go ahead. All right, so there you go, guys. Those are the myths that I wanted to share with you. I'd love to hear what myths you've heard down below, and perhaps you disagree. And by the way, did you pick out the two that actually weren't myths? All right, if you did, I'd love to hear your comment with that down below as well. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to check out those links in the description box. It does help the channel. Thanks for watching. Again, we'll talk to you soon.